We got through. We got through. All right. We are in Genesis 37 this morning. Genesis 37. We are beginning the story, sometimes called the saga, of Joseph and his brothers. It is, I think, the longest section in Genesis. It is one very large story. We're going to see today that there's a chapter that kind of introduces the story, gives us a little background on Joseph's brother Judah and what he was like and going on. We're not going to read that story. I'll summarize it for you. We're going to focus on the main story, which is the conflict between Joseph and his brothers and how God works through that situation. So let's start Genesis chapter 37. And would someone read for us those opening verses 1 through 4? Verses 1 through 4 in Genesis 37.
So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This becomes Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended to his father's flocks. He worked for his brothers, the sons of his father's wives,
Make sure she gets
but Joseph reported to his father there some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Jacob and Joseph more than any of his other children. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him.
Okay, Zach, thank you. What is causing the tensions between Joseph and his brothers? Yeah, Zach.
Favoritism.
Favoritism is one of the big issues. We've seen this problem in this family line earlier in the story. And here it is rearing its head again. Big effect upon the family line here. There's another factor, though. Something else has happened in the family. What is it that's causing tensions between Joseph and his brothers?
Joseph sent a bad report to his dad.
Okay, Joseph tells on his brothers.
Oh, like snitches.
Yeah, snitches get stitches, I think. Right?
Yeah. That's the
So Joseph has gotten in trouble with his brothers because of his behavior. Well, I guess you might ultimately say because of their behavior. He's reacting to what they have done. But also because of this family practice of showing favoritism. Have you ever seen this happen in a family before? Some of you are violently shaking your heads. It does come up as an issue. Sometimes it's a perception that the children have of the behavior of the parents, but it can also be very real. It can be very real. And especially in a situation like this where you have children born of different mothers. Okay? They all have the same father, but they have different mothers. And that is creating tensions in the family. All right, let's read the next paragraph. Let's see where this is all going with the family. Verses 5 through 8. Verses 5 through 8.
And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren. And they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheep arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obvious to the sheep. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words.
Okay, thank you, Mike. How did these brothers understand Joseph's dream? What did they take away from it?
That they were going to bow down to him.
They're going to bow down to him. Yeah, in the King James, it's the word obeisance, I think, and that means they're going to be like this in front of their brother. You can imagine how they would have felt being told this. Where does Joseph stand in the family line? Do you know? At this point, we've got 11 boys.
Next to last.
Yeah, he's next to last. He's number 11 out of the eventual 12 sons that will be born. Benjamin is yet to come. Yeah, he's I think Benjamin was born last week in our readings. But yeah, he's one of the younger brothers. And so a younger brother is telling the older brothers, you guys are going to be bowing down to me.
That usually don't end well.
That doesn't end well.
Usually ends up in a fight.
Okay.
I don't want to bow down to my brothers.
Yeah. In your families, were the older children expected to lead and guide the younger children? Was that an expectation in your households?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Older, yeah.
Yeah. Zach?
Sometimes it's kind of different in my household, because when it comes to Kevin and I, even though Kevin is older than me, sometimes I kind of take on the older brother role, and I lead him sometimes more than he leads me.
Okay. Yeah, it can be different dynamics in different families, but very often the older children are expected by the parents to offer care to the younger ones.
Because before Billy got married and moved away, he kind of had that role.
He had that role. Okay. Yeah. My older siblings went on the farm. I had 2 older brothers. And when we were down in the barn and they were supposed to get certain chores done, I was at their bidding. I had to do what they asked, and they would put me up in the peak of the mow for stacking the hay, and they'd run up the hay as fast as they could. And I was running across the bales trying to stack it. Jerry?
My sisters, they were never around when I was little. When I was 4, they were moving out age. And so there's like 13 years difference between me and my sisters. And, but as I grew older, and even still today, they take me under their wing. It just comes natural. It's never expected of them because they were so much older than me and they were actually out of that household. But they just do it naturally. There's a bond. It's a bond.
And the 3 of you get together, is it weekly, Sherry?
We get together every Monday night.
Every Monday
without
night.
fail, unless one of us are sick.
Yeah.
And then we still push each other. No.
Yeah.
So that's a commitment we have to each other.
That's wonderful. Go ahead, Mike.
One thing about their situation too, with them being such a age difference, is the father that they grew up with was a worker. He was a truck driver for 40 years. He wasn't home much.
Yeah.
So they didn't get to see their father a whole lot growing up. And, Pat raised them. But then Sherry, being so much younger, she got to be with her dad more because he was home. He was retired, And so they got 2 different looks as far as their father goes. They didn't know their father being there and working with them and doing that because he was always working.
Yeah.
But where Sherry, he was there and she hung on his coattail. And so they have different aspects of life, you know?
Yeah, the family dynamics change all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
And I'm sure with the age range that we're talking about in Jacob's family, there would have been similar factors, weren't there? The older brothers are old and they have established families already, and the younger ones, I think Joseph is 17 when this story is being told. He's more home with his father through this time, which may be a factor with the understanding of the favoritism. He sees his dad more. Go ahead.
There's actually kind of a similar dynamic that's kind of like with my dad and my dad's dad. 'Cause when I was growing up, my dad worked a lot. Then when he was growing up, his dad worked a lot. So my grandma kind of took on, the role more. And then when my grandpa was home in the evening, he didn't do much with the kids, kind of versus my dad who worked the same hours, but he did everything with Kevin and I.
Yeah. Yeah, be thinking about your own families as you're hearing these stories in Genesis. Be thinking about your own families and the things going on in your families. But remember this, and you've heard me say this a few times as we've looked at this book. What we're given here in Genesis is not necessarily examples of what to do in family life. There's a lot of bad examples in the family life here in the story of Jacob and his sons. So let's move on now. Someone read for us verses 9 through 11. Let's see what happens next.
And he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brethren and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obedience to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come and bow down ourselves to thee on the earth? And his brother envied him, but his father observed it, saying.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So, is it a good thing that Joseph is sharing this information about his dreams with his family members?
No.
No? Why not, Zach? Why isn't it a good thing?
Because it seems like, he's living in the dream world and he's thinking that this is going to happen in real life. But there could be something completely different planned for him, which is what the case was in this.
Yeah, things are not going to go quite the way he imagines. Go ahead, Brian.
I think it's good that he's doing this, because in the end he can say, I told you so.
Are you an older brother, Brian?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He's sharing his inmost thoughts here. The responses he's getting are not necessarily good. How does Dad feel about it? How does Dad react to what's being said and done?
He was upset.
He's upset. Yeah, he rebukes his son for doing this, but look at verse 11. Look at the last verse in the passage.
It's like he was just sitting back and watching, just seeing what happened or what took place.
Okay. So Jacob rebukes Joseph for doing this, but at the same time, he's kind of sitting back and considering what's going on, isn't he? He's kind of wondering about it.
Yeah, what if?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. That's a very different response from the brothers, isn't it? They don't seem to be thinking that way at all. They're just ready to get rid of the guy. Go ahead.
Well, you wonder if Jacob's thinking about his own dream, with Jacob's ladder and
Okay.
earlier.
Yeah. God used Jacob's earlier dream to tell him, to confirm the covenant. And that the land was going to be his and for his family. So God has worked in Jacob's life this way in the past, and now he sees a son having similar experiences. Yeah, he instead of just rushing to judgment like the brothers, he's pondering this and reflecting on it. Interesting.
Yeah, it must have been like more than a dream, you know what I mean? Because people have weird dreams all the time, and if it's gonna offend your family, you usually don't bring it up to them. Even a 17-year-old would know
Well,
that.
Gretchen's been having dreams, she's not telling us. Go ahead.
But like even a 17-year-old knows that, so it must have felt like a vision or a message from God or something like that. It wasn't. It must have not felt just like a dream to Joseph, and he must have been going to his family not because he wanted to like shame them, but to ask questions like, "What's going on?" Because this feels more than normal.
Okay, yeah, he's seeing something, maybe he is wondering what this means, and he's asking for their input or their response. But they're having none of it. They don't like it at all. They're not willing to consider it. Go ahead, Joe.
When I was about 15 or 14, I had a dream. And considering my age, I just thought it was just nerves or something.
Okay.
But the dream was about, more or less about the assassination of Kennedy, and my grandfather died.
Wow.
And I couldn't put names to what the event was, but you know how dreams are foggy. And everything came around the happening, and they thought I was being hysterical or something.
Oh.
Because I didn't tell them about it till the day my grandfather was buried. It was the day Kennedy was assassinated, and then I had the dream that we was in Iraq and coming home. But they thought it was just nerves, and it was all affected from all this, but it was a dream.
Ah. Yeah, different cultures and probably even different families react to or think about dreams differently. We know at this time, a practice that happened in some of the religions in the area was if they had a big decision to make, they would actually go and sleep in the temple with the hope that they would have a dream that would help them make their decision to think about things. So there was an openness to dreams in the culture at this time for them to, they thought they could learn by having dreams. I'm thinking of, there's an artist by the name of Salvador Dali. And he would eat certain cheese because he believed that it would cause him to have dreams. And then he would use those dreams in his artwork. So I don't know how true that is if a cheese does that, but...
What was it laced with?
What was it laced with? Zach, go ahead.
Can't some dreams though, can't they be like visions by God, like him preparing you like for something that's gonna happen in your life, whether or not like it's good or bad?
We certainly see in Genesis that God is sending dreams to certain persons. And later on in the story of Joseph, that's going to happen in Pharaoh's life. And Joseph is going to be the interpreter of his dreams.
Okay.
So these things do happen as described in the scripture.
Yeah.
But yeah, be careful about what you tell about your dreams, I suppose.
Because the reason I was asking that is when Joe was talking about that stuff with burying her grandpa and Kennedy, one of my best friends, almost 2 years ago, his son passed away. And I think like maybe a week or a month before his son passed, he had a dream that he was speaking at his son's funeral.
Oh, wow.
And this was like before it actually happened.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Sometimes I don't want to know what's coming.
Yeah.
Mike, and then we got to move on. Go ahead.
I just was thinking though, how well would it work with us as people for God to send dreams to us to speak to us? Because we look at our dreams as just that, dreams.
Okay.
They don't make any sense, a lot of them. A lot of them are just total outlandish. I mean, you wake up from them. Sometimes you wake up and you're in a cold sweat.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you're freaking out in your dream, and then you wake up and you're like, thank God that wasn't true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had them like that before.
Yeah.
You wake up and you're wet and you're sweating.
Yeah, so things are different for God's people today than they were in the days of Jacob and Joseph, right?
Yeah.
We have the Bible.
Yeah.
God has given us His revealed will in the Holy Scriptures to guide our lives and give us direction. And at that time, they didn't have that. They didn't have the Bible as we know it.
he had to be more in their face.
Yeah, perhaps God had to be more direct in their lives than he needs to be or has to be in our lives today.
Yeah.
Let's move on and read a little bit more here. Let's see, the father gives him an assignment. He has to go out and find his brothers who are out watching the sheep. Shechem comes back up again. We had that in one of the stories earlier. But let's read on from verses 18 to 24. Let's see what happens when Joseph finds his brothers. 18 to 24.
Then they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Is that it, or?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Karen. So I want you to think for a moment about the very worst moment you have had with a sibling or siblings. How do those worst moments compare with what's happening here between Joseph and his brothers? Think about it. I'll tell you one of the worst that I've had, as I remember it. I was up in the attic with my brother. We were playing, and he must have frustrated me or something. I don't remember why, but I picked up a croquet mallet and I hit him over the head with it. And he went screaming down the stairs, ran down to my parents, and of course I was in trouble.
Did you call him a sissy?
Say again?
Did you call him a sissy?
No, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I was pretty young at the time. I'm not sure how old I was, but I remember it. Something must have happened to imprint this on my memory. But things can happen in between kids, can't they? Things can happen.
Well, I mean, I got one that I'm like you. I was young, and I don't know why I did it, because I was the youngest of 6.
Yeah.
And Teresa was just above me.
Mm-hmm.
So me and her were pretty close because she was the only girl, 5 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked on her quite a bit, you know. She was a young teenage girl and wanted to have nice legs and stuff like that, and they would always punch her in the legs. That way she always had bruises.
Ouch!
Yeah, so she always had bruises. It's like, don't ask me why they did it, but one day she had to, and my mom raised us. My dad wasn't around. And my mom worked all kinds of crazy swing shifts. So we had to do chores every day. You know, we had to clean house and do dishes, cook dinner. But anyway, she was cleaning up the house, and I got mad at her because she was picking up all my stuff. And I picked up a pair of scissors and threw them at her and stuck her in the arm. Ooh. She'll show you today the scar.
She's still got the scar.
Oh, she likes to tell people that one. Yeah, my brother, he threw scissors at me.
Oh, mercy. Mercy, it's getting violent in here.
I don't remember. I don't know why. I mean, I can't see why I would have reacted that way. I just got mad and I threw the scissors at her.
Yeah. Do you get along with Teresa now?
Oh, we're very close out of all of us, yeah.
Good. Yeah, I get along with my brother Eric.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, he didn't do it, thank goodness. There was one time when I was still a teen and Kevin was in his early 20s. Kevin sometimes likes to fall asleep downstairs. My parents have always told me to fall asleep to get him up, to wake him up, tell him to go upstairs. So then one night when he did fall asleep, I woke him up, and then he got frustrated, then he got mad at me, and then he threatened to lay his hands on me. And I told him, if you do it, I'll tell Dad. So he backed off.
Yeah, okay, he backed down. He didn't want to mess with Dad.
No, you didn't. When it came to our mom and dad,
Yeah.
Dad was the one you didn't want to get in trouble with.
Yeah. So with kids, even in well-disciplined and well-mannered families, things can go wrong. Strong tensions here in this family of Joseph and his brothers. Yeah, but I don't know that none of us has told a story quite as extreme as this, where they're talking about killing their brother. Who steps in to rescue? Reuben. And who is Reuben in the family? He's the oldest brother. He's the oldest brother, and he has the sense to realize that this is the wrong thing to do, and he steps in to rescue Joseph. It's kind of a rough rescue, though, isn't it? He ends up in a pit just the same. But let's read on now, verses 25 to 28. Let's see what happens next.
And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt.
Okay, so Joseph gets sold into the bondage of Egypt. Notice in the passage that it mentions Ishmaelites, it mentions Midianites, and it speaks of them interchangeably. These are tribes that are further to the east. They're probably coming up from the Arabian Peninsula. That's where some of these items that they've mentioned in the account come from. They're acting as traders, and they've come up the Arabian Peninsula, and now they're turning to go down into Egypt. Who is Ishmael in the relation to this family?
He's a half-brother.
So he's a half-brother to, it would be Isaac. A half-brother to Isaac. You remember earlier in Genesis that Abraham has a son by Hagar, an Egyptian slave girl, and that is Ishmael. And today we think of them as the Arabs. It's the Arab people that live in that part of the world. And so this is kin in its own way. These are kin to Jacob and Joseph's families. How much does Joseph go for?
20 pieces of silver?
20 pieces of silver, or 20 shekels of silver. That is, we know from other documents of this time period that was the going price for a slave. You paid 20 shekels of silver. Later on, because of inflation, the price goes up. How much does Jesus get sold for? 30. Okay? We know closer to New Testament times, that tends to be the going rate for selling a slave. I've got hands back here. Go ahead, Mike.
I mean, what was the custom back then of selling somebody into slavery? Was it that easy? I mean, they didn't have any good reason to sell him in. I mean, other than his dreams. Was it a custom? You could just sell anybody into slavery?
Well, he's captive to them. He's powerless.
Yeah, I mean,
to them.
But what would stop somebody from selling me or you, or back then? what would stop them from doing that if they just had a grudge against you?
Yeah, well, ethics would be the only thing really standing in your
That's the only thing that
way.
would stop them.
There's no legal authority, single legal authority in the land. You remember the situation, you've got all kinds of different tribal groups settled. Some of them have kings, some of them don't. The Israelites are being led by Jacob, and he's kind of like a sheik. If you think of modern cultures, he's like a Bedouin sheik. They move from place to place, so they're not a settled tribe in the land. And there's no law that would stop this. So it's all about power in a tribal society. And we talked last week about raiding, how tribes would raid each other and take from each other in these ways. And so the brothers are acting in keeping with the culture of that time. You remember what they did to the people of Shechem.
Yeah.
And took the women and children there. So it's a violent time. And the brothers come out with this violent response. Yeah, Brian.
Do you have any idea what a shekel is worth in dollars?
A shekel, in your Bibles, there probably is a chart that tells just how much it weighs, a piece of silver for a shekel. Dollars, no, I don't. I'd have to sit down and calculate that. Of course, the value of the dollar, of course, changes as well as the price of silver does. Last I knew, silver was going about $30 an ounce, and I don't think a shekel is a full ounce.
3/10 of a dollar.
I think Google says 3/10 of a dollar.
Shell found it.
Oh, you found it? 3/10 of a dollar is
0.3.
the weight of a shekel?
Not the weight.
No, that's the current currency of Israel.
Current currency of
Oh,
the shekel. of the
okay, and that's a coinage. It's not a silver weight. So early on, there's no coinage. Coinage doesn't show up. Money, as we know it today, doesn't show up until the Persian period. Okay, so much later in history. At this time, when you were trading, you were using commodities, and silver was a common commodity. It was good for buying and selling. And so they cut it up, they called it bit silver. You cut it up into little pieces and at a certain weight. And then you'd pay out your bits for something. And the going price for a slave is 20. Okay, that's how it was done. So these are among the reasons we know that the book of Genesis is really ancient and early, because we read parallel documents and they describe the same situation. Okay, so Genesis is very much an ancient book. Sometimes the critics try to say it was written much later, and they're just wrong. They're just wrong about that. Let's see. So Joseph gets sold. Who sells him? Who wants to sell him?
Judah.
Judah does.
And it's interesting because we get the name Jew from Judah.
Yes.
And here he is way back then, and he didn't want to kill his brother, he didn't want to make money.
There's an interest in money here. He's a trader. Why do him in when we can make a profit? Is what Judah argues. We get a little bit more about the character of Judah in the next chapter, chapter 38. We're not going to read that one because it would take us too long. But that gives us a picture of what Judah was like in his character. He's not an honest person. He's a devious person. He's got his father's bad traits. But what happens with Judah later in Israel's history? You know?
The largest land is Judah.
Yes, they become the largest tribe. They become the largest of the tribes. By the time of Moses, Judah is the leading tribe because of its size. And there is another tribe that becomes a leading tribe, and that's the tribe of Ephraim. And Ephraim is a son of Joseph. It's interesting how Moses puts these stories together side by side about what would become the leading tribes in his day, many centuries later. So we're getting a little picture of the interrelationship of Israel by looking at their heritage and their background. So let's finish out this chapter, verses 29 through the end of the chapter, verse 36. 29 to 36. Someone please read.
Oh, go ahead.
When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So who's tearing their robes and why? What's that about?
Reuben.
Reuben?
He's the eldest, so he would have been responsible.
Very good, Kathy. More than likely, Reuben feels responsible for what happens with the younger brother. And so the fact that Judah undermines him, and that's another example of sibling rivalry, isn't it? Judah undermines him while Reuben's off with the flock, and when he comes back, he realizes how much trouble he's going to be in because of what's happened to his younger brother. So he tears the garments. Why tear the garments? Why do this?
Sign of mourning.
It's a sign of mourning, okay? It's sort of like my heart's being torn open, okay? That's why they tear the garments. And we see Reuben do it here. Who else do we see doing it? Jacob. It's interesting, we're not told that the other brothers were tearing their garments. They're not mourning it the same way, are they? Go ahead.
You know, it's a little ironic that none of the brothers liked the idea of him being in charge, the youngest. But Judah didn't hesitate to take charge and make a decision that affected his life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Reuben, he feels a little guilty, I think.
Yeah. One of the things they tell us in the study of what's called group dynamics is if there is a leader, there's always a counter leader. Okay? Whenever a group of people are together, if somebody is leading, there's always somebody there to question what the leader is doing and to offer other opinions, other alternatives, even if they're doing it on the sly instead of openly. Okay? There's always a left and a right in a gathering of people. Always happens, even within the church, right? Where we all get along and think the same way.
On most
No, there's always differences of opinion, isn't there?
I said on most things.
On most things, on most things. There's always room for discussion, isn't there? And Judah is playing that role, isn't he? He's playing that role. Reuben has set a pathway for the brothers to go. It's one that saves Joseph's life. It's good for the father. It's going to be good for the family. And Judah comes in on the side and says, no, wait a minute. There's money to be made here. And leads the family in a different direction. Yeah, group dynamics. It's always, always with us. The boys aren't honest. We've seen this in the family before. Why is honesty important in family life?
Trust, yeah.
Trust. If you're not being honest with each other, it undermines trust. And that makes everything more difficult because you're always questioning, is the person being honest with me? Can I rely on them in my situation, in my trouble? And that's why, well, the most basic relationship with God, isn't it? It's about trust. God says, trust me, rely on me, I'm honest, I'm dependable. And he calls us into a faith relationship with our God. Because we're going to meet all kinds of people in life that we cannot trust. It's going to happen in this life. I'm going to summarize for you really quickly what's going on in chapter 38. Of course, this chapter we've just studied, 37, is a setup for the much longer story. A lot's going to happen. Keep in mind, though, of these events in chapter 37 and the way they point forward to other things. Judah is raising his family here in chapter 38, and he has some sons, and one of the sons takes a wife, and he does not have children by her, and he dies. And the custom in this time, and it becomes in the law of Moses at a later time, is for the brother to take that widowed wife and to raise up children by her. It's a way of preserving the family line for the brother. Okay, this is how things are done. But the brother doesn't follow through on this as he should, and he dies. And then another brother is involved, and he dies. And so she is left without anyone to care for her. Her name is Tamar, and she is basically bereft of care. And there's a son that is supposed to marry her, but Judah is afraid now. His sons are dying. He's afraid to give the last son to this woman. I'm not sure what he's thinking, if she's a black widow, as they say, because they keep disappearing. But he's afraid for this to happen. And so she's going to try to find her way back into the family. And she does this in a way that's not good. But it reveals to us more about Judah and what he is like. She pretends to be a prostitute by the side of the road. And Judah comes and finds her and hires her, for lack of a better way of saying it.
That's what they do.
And then he sends somebody back to give her payment, I think, which is a goat. The exchange is for a goat. But she's not there when they go back to find her. And some months later, she begins to show. And when this happens, Judah is called. He's the head of the family. And so he's responsible. He's kind of like a judge in the family situation. He's responsible for meting out punishment upon her because she has gone astray. And at that moment, she brings out a few items. One is a staff, a walking stick, and the other, I believe, is a ring, a signet ring. And she says, the man who got me pregnant is the guy who belongs to these. And guess who they belong to?
Judah.
They belong to Judah. And he realizes that he has been dishonest, he has been immoral, and the blame is on him. And Tamar is, she's brought back into the family in this way and cared for, and has 2 children. Look with me at the end of the chapter. I'm going to read from verse 27 to verse 30 about the children that get born. And these would be sons of Judah. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez, which means breach. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. And these 2 boys go on to be part of the clans of the tribe of Judah. So Tamar's children don't get cast out and forgotten and left. They become part of that tribe of Judah in later years. But it's interesting how Moses sets this whole story up. He starts with the story of Joseph. We see Judah's role undermining the family life by selling his brother. And then we immediately get a story about Judah's immorality and how he wasn't a righteous man. And yet God has mercy on these sons of Judah, and he has a plan for them. We see this again and again in Genesis, how families go astray, and yet God has mercy upon them. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, when she came before Judah for punishment, it's amazing how the rules changed once they found out Judah was the father. Yeah.
Yes.
Back in those days, they would punish the women, but the men, look what they're doing.
Yes. So we have here a male-dominated culture, and no surprise, the rules are a bit different because of this.
Yeah.
Now, we shouldn't conclude from this that all Israelites thought this way and acted this way. But it's clear that in Judah's family, in Judah's household, this is how things are going. And yet the Lord has his way of teaching Judah a lesson, doesn't he? He does it through this twisted and turned story here with Tamar.
Pastor.
Yeah.
Judah had all those boys and they died, and she kind of snuck in there. But if she had, couldn't he have on his own taken her, Judah, as a wife, or did he have to do it with his son?
I suppose he could have done that, but at this point he's afraid to do that. The boys have died in the relationship with her.
He's afraid he died too.
So perhaps, yeah, he's thinking that I'm not gonna follow through with the family this way.
That they can do that.
I don't know for sure. It's usually a brother responsibility rather than the father responsibility. I'd have to research that to know how all of that. It's called the Levirate. It's called a Levirate marriage. Not Levite, that's a tribe, but Levirate marriage. It has to do with the role of a brother-in-law. So that was the custom at that time. I'm going to get us through the next chapter. It's interesting. We've got the Tamar and Judah story, which is a sex story. The next chapter is also a sex story. We're back to Joseph. Joseph is down in Egypt, and he is sold to an Egyptian leader named Potiphar. And he's serving in Potiphar's house, and everything is going great. The household is prospering under Joseph's leadership. And as things are going so well, one day Potiphar is away from home, and Potiphar's wife says, "Joseph, you're a handsome man. Come sleep with me," is essentially what happens. And Joseph's like, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't do that. I can't betray my master. I can't do this thing. This would be wrong." And as he's leaving the room, she reaches out and grabs his cloak that he's wearing, or shirt that he's wearing, and she's tugging on him, and he lets that thing fall off, and he flees the room. When Potiphar comes back, she shows this to him and says, "This servant of yours came into my room and tried to have his way with me." She turns the story around. It's another twisted story here, isn't it? And Joseph, what happens to Joseph? Does anybody know the story? He gets thrown into prison. He gets thrown into prison. And that's where we're going to pick up next time in the story of Joseph. But we see Joseph shows himself to be a noble and responsible person. He shows himself to be a leader and wanting to follow the way of the Lord. in contrast to some of these other folks who are around him, who won't follow God's ways and are going astray. We're going to see how God takes care of Joseph despite this suffering he has. If you get a chance this week, read those chapters, have a closer look at them. We're trying to press on, though, to get to the end of Genesis. Genesis, well, this is true of the Bible generally. It's an adult book. The stories in Genesis and other parts of the Bible, these are not children's stories. Although this is one I've used with teenagers before to talk about the sixth commandment. But the younger ones, I don't know if we do that with the younger ones. A couple comments back here, and then we're going to pray. Go ahead, Sherry.
Can we take a step back?
Yeah.
Judah and
Tamar.
When she was at the side of the road and he took her for a prostitute,
Yeah.
he knew her, right?
He would have known her, but she was wearing a veil.
Oh,
The Bible
okay.
says she was veiled.
So she was disguised, so he did not know it was her.
He did not realize it was his daughter-in-law. Yeah, she was veiled. So, and apparently that was something the women did, perhaps to protect their identity, their privacy.
Okay, that's
Yeah. Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like Joseph, he was sold into slavery. Was it possible back then for somebody to come along and purchase him out of slavery?
Sure, someone could have made an offer that would have been a way for him to be freed. The practice is called manumission, and this is something actually that early Christians did. Early Christians had an opposition to slavery, and in the Roman Empire there were slaves everywhere. A lot of the early Christians were slaves.
Yeah.
And churches would pool their money sometimes and set people free. There's documents that we found in early Christianity of people doing that for one another. God's people have always had an aversion to slavery, although the law of Moses allows for it under certain conditions. So, and that was a big discussion back in earlier years in America. A lot of discussion whether the Bible supported slavery or not. Big issue. Go ahead.
I just looked up and they said Hammurabi's code said unskilled labor was about 10 shekels a year, and like subsistence living was about 22 shekels a year. So he was probably sold for 1 or 2 years' wages.
Okay, so that was the going price for someone. I guess they would consider him skilled labor then, if they're paying that much.
Is a 17-year-old skilled?
Well, we don't know what kind of training he might have had. As being in a large and powerful family, he might have been tutored or trained. He could have known things like math, maybe even writing, and those were skills back at that time. Very few people would have those kinds of skills. So, thank you. I think we should probably pray. Let's bow our heads in a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wisdom that we receive as we receive the Holy Scriptures and read what the stories of God's people have experienced in the past. Lord, we pray that you would give us the wisdom not to show favoritism within our families, but to learn to show mercy and kindness and forgiveness. Help us, O Lord, to value and encourage and support the lives of the children that are around us, and seek ways of peace with brother and sister and with all the family. Bless us now as we depart and go our way through Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen.
Amen.